Sir, I told you already. Step away from the executive elevators. You do not belong here.
I belong exactly where I'm standing. I have a 10 o'clock briefing with the secretary.
Yeah?
Then use the freight elevator like everyone else. Don't reach for anything.
I am removing my federal identification.
The high-definition lenses of the Zenith Federal Plaza security system missed nothing. They recorded at 30 frames per second, creating a digital archive of every briefcase, every visitor badge, and every interaction that occurred within the expansive marble lobby. And on this particular Tuesday morning, those cameras were silently documenting the end of a security firm's multi-million-dollar government contract. They were capturing the exact moment a 28-year-old guard named Kyle Vance decided to destroy his own life because he couldn't believe the man in the three-piece suit belonged there. The man walking through the revolving doors was Marcus Thorne. At 58 years old, Marcus moved with the specific, unhurried cadence of a man who had spent 3 decades navigating the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. He was wearing a charcoal bespoke suit, a silk tie, and carrying a leather briefcase that contained classified briefing documents regarding national infrastructure vulnerabilities. Marcus wasn't just a visitor. He was a senior federal advisor, a man whose security clearance was 3 levels higher than the building's director. He was scheduled for a 10:00 a.m. briefing with the secretary. He was on time, he was prepared, and he was thinking about the bridge collapse statistics in Ohio. He was not thinking about the security guard standing at the podium near the elevator bank. Kyle Vance had been working at the Zenith Federal Plaza for 6 months. He was bored. He was ambitious in all the wrong ways, and he considered himself the first line of defense against unauthorized elements. When he looked up from his monitor and saw Marcus Thorne walking toward the executive elevators, his brain didn't register senior official. It didn't register dignitary. It registered a black man in a suit, and Kyle's internal bias immediately filled in the blanks. In Kyle's mind, Marcus was a high-end courier, a driver, or perhaps a defense attorney trying to bypass protocol. He certainly wasn't someone who belonged in the executive lift without an escort. Kyle stepped out from behind the podium. He didn't adjust his uniform or straighten his posture to greet a superior. Instead, he dropped his hand to his belt, resting it near his pepper spray, a subtle, aggressive signal of authority. He moved to intercept Marcus, placing his body directly in the path of the elevator bank. "Hold up there," Kyle said, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension reserved for people he deemed subordinates. "You're going the wrong way." Marcus stopped. He didn't flinch. He didn't look confused. He simply looked at Kyle with a calm, level gaze that had made junior senators stutter during committee hearings. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice deep and resonant. "The service elevators are around the back near the loading dock," Kyle said, pointing a thumb over his shoulder without breaking eye contact. "This bank is for building executives and clearance personnel only. Couriers and maintenance have to use the freight." Marcus shifted his briefcase to his left hand. He had heard this tone before. He had heard it in 1985 when he was a junior staffer. He had heard it in 1999 when he was a department head. And he was hearing it now in 2024 from a man young enough to be his grandson. "I'm not a courier," Marcus said, his tone remaining polite but firm. "And I'm not maintenance. I have a 10 o'clock meeting with the secretary." "Sure you do," Kyle smirked, rocking back on his heels. "And I'm having lunch with the president. Look, buddy, don't make this hard. Just turn around, go out the revolving doors, walk around the building to the loading dock, and sign in there. If you're on the list, they'll let you up." "Young man," Marcus said, stepping forward and reaching into his inner suit pocket. "I am a senior federal advisor. I have my credentials right here. If you will look at them, you will see that I have top-tier access to this facility." Kyle didn't look at the hand reaching for the ID. He stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Don't reach for anything." Kyle snapped, his voice rising. "I didn't ask for your ID. I gave you an order. Step away from the elevator and exit the building. You are currently trespassing in a secured zone." Before we continue with how this confrontation spirals out of control, I need you to take a second. If you believe that respect should be given to everyone regardless of how they look, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been stopped from doing your job because someone judged you by your appearance? This story is about to get infuriating and you need to see how it ends. Marcus froze. His hand hovered near his lapel. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew the legal parameters of this interaction better than the guard ever could. "I am complying with your request for identification," Marcus said slowly, clearly, so that the microphones he knew were embedded in the ceiling would pick up every syllable. "I am removing my federal identification card. I am not trespassing. I am a government official reporting for duty." "I don't care what you say you are," Kyle interrupted, his face reddening. He felt his authority being challenged, and for a man like Kyle, that was intolerable. "I'm telling you that you don't fit the profile for this elevator bank. Now are you going to leave, or do I have to escort you out?" "I am not leaving," Marcus said. He pulled his wallet out slowly, flipping it open to reveal the gold badge and the laminated federal ID with the holographic seal of the United States. He held it up eye level with Kyle. "Read the card, officer. Read the name and the clearance level." Kyle didn't even glance at the card. He looked straight into Marcus's eyes, fueled by a toxic mix of arrogance and implicit bias. "I'm not looking at your fake badge," Kyle sneered. "I'm calling this in. It is a federal offense to impede a government official in the execution of their duties." Marcus warned, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. "You are making a mistake that will cost you your career. Look at the card." "That's it," Kyle said. He keyed his radio, his voice loud enough to turn heads across the lobby. "Dispatch, I have a hostile individual in the main lobby. Refusing orders, becoming belligerent. Attempting to access executive lift without clearance, requesting backup." The word belligerent hung in the air. The lobby was busy. Lawyers, lobbyists, and administrative staff were crisscrossing the marble floor. At the sound of Kyle's raised voice, the ambient chatter died down. People stopped, heads turned. Marcus stood perfectly still. He was the picture of dignity. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't cursed. He hadn't made a threatening move. Yet he was being described as hostile over the airwaves. A woman in a Navy business suit standing near the reception desk about 20 feet away stopped checking her emails. She looked at Marcus, then at the aggressive posture of the guard. She quietly slid her phone up the camera lens, peering over the top of her purse. She hit record. "Sir, for the last time," Kyle shouted, playing to the audience now trying to justify his aggression. "Step back from the secure area." "I am standing my ground," Marcus stated. "I am authorized to be here. You are violating my civil rights and interfering with federal business. I am asking you to call your supervisor immediately." "I am the authority here," Kyle yelled. He was too far gone now. To back down would be to admit he was wrong in front of the watching crowd, to admit he had profiled this man. His ego wouldn't allow it. The adrenaline of the confrontation was clouding his judgment, blinding him to the obvious reality of Marcus's status. "You are a contractor," Marcus corrected him, "and you are about to violate Title 18 of the United States Code. I suggest you take a breath and look at my identification." Kyle didn't take a breath. He reached for his belt. "I'm detaining you for trespassing and disorderly conduct." "On what grounds?" Marcus asked. "State your probable cause." "Refusal to comply with security directives." Kyle stepped forward, grabbing Marcus's left arm. The contact was shocking. A collective gasp went through the lobby. You simply did not grab a man dressed like Marcus Thorne. It broke every social code of the professional world. Marcus didn't pull away. He didn't fight back. He knew that any physical resistance would be used to justify whatever violence came next. He went rigid, allowing his body to be a witness to the assault. "Turn around," Kyle barked, spinning Marcus roughly. "Hands behind your back." "I am not resisting," Marcus said loudly, ensuring the recording phone caught it. I am a senior federal advisor. I am submitting to this unlawful arrest under protest. Kyle jammed his knee into the back of Marcus's expensive suit pants, forcing him off balance. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet sound of the cuffs closing around Marcus's wrists echoed off the marble walls. Click, click. It was a sound that signified the end of Kyle's life as he knew it, though he didn't know it yet. Kyle shoved Marcus toward the security podium, forcing him to stand facing the growing crowd. Marcus stood tall, even with his hands bound behind him. The humiliation was burning a hot coal in his chest, but he refused to show it. He looked out at the faces of the shocked bystanders. He locked eyes with the woman recording the video and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Don't stop," the nod said. "Capture everything." Kyle was breathing hard, pumped full of adrenaline. He felt powerful. He had neutralized the threat. He picked up his radio again. "Suspect is in custody. Situation under control." The elevator doors behind them chimed. They slid open with a soft whoosh. Stepping out of the elevator was Frank Miller. Frank was the director of security for the entire plaza, a 55-year-old retired D.C. police captain with a buzz cut and a lifetime of street experience. He had heard the radio chatter and had come down to see what the hostile intruder situation was. Frank took 2 steps out of the elevator and stopped dead. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he was about to faint. He didn't see a hostile intruder. He saw Marcus Thorne, the man who had approved the department's budget last year. The man Frank had shared coffee with 3 days ago, handcuffed like a common criminal by a guard who had barely finished his probationary period. "Vance!" Frank roared. The sound was so loud it cracked across the lobby like a gunshot. "What the hell are you doing?" Kyle turned, smiling, expecting praise. "Director, I caught this guy trying to sneak onto your elevator. Claimed he had a meeting. Refused to go to the loading dock. He was belligerent, so I secured him." Frank didn't walk. He ran. He sprinted the 20 feet across the marble floor. "Unlock him. Unlock him right now." Kyle blinked, confused. "Sir, he's a trespasser. He wouldn't show ID." "That is the senior federal advisor to the Infrastructure Commission, you idiot!" Frank screamed, shoving Kyle aside. Frank fumbled for his own master keys, his hands shaking. He spun Marcus around gently. "Mr. Thorne, sir, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Please let me get these off you." Marcus stood stoically as Frank unlocked the cuffs. He rubbed his wrists where the metal had dug into his skin. He adjusted his suit jacket. He checked his cufflinks. Then he looked at Kyle Vance. Kyle looked like he had been struck by lightning. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a dawn of horrifying realization. "Federal advisor," he whispered. Marcus ignored Kyle completely. He turned his gaze to Frank Miller. The silence in the lobby was absolute. "Director Miller," Marcus said, his voice calm, deadly, and carrying the weight of the entire federal government. "I want this man removed from my sight immediately. Then I want you to escort me to the secure conference room. We have a great deal of paperwork to do before I speak to the secretary." "Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir," Frank stammered. He turned to Kyle, his face purple with rage. "Give me your badge. Give me your radio. Get out of this building." "You are relieved of duty. Go sit on the curb outside and wait for the police." "Police?" Kyle squeaked. "But I was just following protocol." "You profiled a federal official and assaulted him," Frank hissed. "You're lucky he doesn't have Secret Service detail, or you'd be bleeding out on the floor right now. Get out!" Kyle Vance, stripped of his radio and his badge, walked past the silent crowd. He walked past the woman with the phone who tracked him all the way to the revolving doors. He walked out into the D.C. heat, a man whose life had effectively ended 10 minutes ago. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from shock to crisis management. Frank Miller ushered Marcus toward the secure area, but Marcus stopped. He walked over to the woman who had been recording. "Thank you," Marcus said softly. "Did you get the beginning?" "I got the part where he refused to look at your ID." The woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I got it all." "Please keep that video safe," Marcus said. "My legal team will be in touch." In the secure conference room on the first floor, the air was cold. Marcus sat at the head of the mahogany table. He had declined the offer of water. He had declined the offer of an ice pack for his wrists. He was in work mode. Frank Miller stood at the other end of the table, looking like a man awaiting a firing squad. "Frank," Marcus said, placing his hands flat on the table. "I like you. We've worked together on building protocols for 3 years, but what happened out there wasn't a mistake. It was a culture." "I know, Marcus. I know." Frank set his head in his hands. "He's a new hire. He passed the background check. I had no idea." "You had no idea he was the kind of man who sees a black man in a suit and thinks driver?" Marcus asked. "Did you check his stop logs? Did you check who he harasses and who he waves through?" Frank went silent. "I want the logs, Frank. I want the security footage from every angle in that lobby. I want the audio recording from his radio transmission. And I want the visitor logs for the last 6 months showing who this specific guard has stopped." "You'll have them," Frank said. "I'll pull them myself." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number on speaker. "This is Thorne," Marcus said when the line picked up. "Go ahead, sir." A sharp female voice answered. It was his lead counsel. "I need you to open a file. Civil rights violation, unlawful detention, assault, false imprisonment. Identify the defendants as Zenith Security Solutions and Kyle Vance individually. Also contact the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Tell them I have a Title VI case wrapped in a bow for them." Frank Miller winced. A Title VI investigation meant the federal government would audit the entire company's practices regarding discrimination. It was the nuclear option. "Are you hurt, sir?" the lawyer asked. "My dignity is bruised," Marcus said, looking at the red marks on his wrists. "But my resolve is just fine. Let's make sure Mr. Vance never wears a uniform again." The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The video recorded by the woman in the lobby hit social media by that evening. By the next morning, it had 4 million views. The title was simple: "Racist Guard Arrests Senior Advisor for Being Black." The internet did what it does best. It dissected the video frame by frame. Viewers pointed out the way Kyle stood with his hand on his weapon before Marcus even spoke. They pointed out the way Kyle refused to look at the ID that was inches from his face. They contrasted Marcus's perfect calmness with Kyle's escalating aggression. The comments section was a firestorm. "He had his ID in his hand," one user wrote. "The guard didn't want ID, he wanted submission." Another wrote, "Imagine being so blinded by hate you try to arrest the guy who runs the building." The internal investigation at Zenith Security confirmed Marcus's suspicions. The logs revealed a damning pattern. In his 6 months of employment, Kyle Vance had stopped 42 people near the elevators. 38 of them were people of color. In contrast, hours of video footage showed him waving through white men in casual clothing without a second glance. It wasn't just implicit bias. It was explicit practiced discrimination. Kyle Vance was terminated immediately, but the firing was the least of his problems. The lawsuit Marcus filed was relentless. It didn't just go after Kyle. It went after the hiring practices of Zenith Security. It exposed that the company had ignored red flags in Kyle's psychological evaluation because they needed bodies to fill shifts. Zenith Security attempted to settle quickly to make the headlines go away. They offered a standard payout. Marcus rejected it. "This isn't about money," Marcus told his lawyer. "This is about precedent. I want them to admit liability on the record." 6 months later, the settlement was finalized. Zenith Security Solutions agreed to pay $2.4 million in damages. But more importantly, they signed a binding agreement to overhaul their entire training program. The new Thorne protocol, required mandatory recurring anti-bias training for every guard in their employ across the nation. It required independent audits of stop and detain statistics. As for Kyle Vance, the internet never forgets. A simple search of his name brought up the video as the first result. He applied to other security firms, but no one would touch him. He applied to police academies, but his background check now contained a flagged incident of civil rights violation. He tried to get a job at a warehouse, but the manager recognized him from the news. Kyle Vance, who had once felt so powerful holding a pair of handcuffs, was now learning what it felt like to be powerless. 1 year later, Marcus Thorne walked back into the Zenith Federal Plaza. The lobby was the same marble, the same high ceilings. But the atmosphere was different. The guard at the podium was a new hire, a woman in her 40s. She stood up as Marcus approached. She didn't look at him with suspicion. She looked at him with recognition. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she said, nodding respectfully. "The elevators are unlocked for you, sir." "Thank you," Marcus said. He walked to the elevator bank, the same spot where he had been handcuffed. He paused for a moment, looking at the reflection in the polished metal doors. He adjusted his tie. He wasn't just a survivor of the incident. He was the architect of the change it had brought. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, isolating him in the quiet hum of the lift, Marcus finally let out a long breath. He thought about the men who didn't have his title. He thought about the young interns, the messengers, the fathers and sons who looked like him but didn't have a direct line to the DOJ. He had fought this battle for them as much as for himself. Bias is a ghost in the machine of our society. It hides in policies, it hides in assumptions, and sometimes it stands right in front of you wearing a uniform. Marcus Thorne had won this round, but the war wasn't over. It takes more than lawsuits to change hearts, but consequences are a good place to start. What would you have done if you were in the lobby that day? Would you have recorded it? Would you have stepped in? It's easy to say yes now, but real courage happens in the moment. If this story moved you, if you believe in justice and accountability, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below. Do you think the punishment for the guard was enough? Should the company have faced criminal charges? Let's talk about it, and don't forget to subscribe. We have more stories coming that shine a light on the truth. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.